I hope that everyone's doing well. I want to start off by going over the homework from yesterday. Um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, I have two different Word documents. So here's the one that's your actual homework, and then here's the other. If you want to submit your homework this way, I just go to Insert and Table, and then you select something like this, and then it creates this table. You do have to stretch it down a little bit, but it is an easy way for you to show your Punnett squares. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the homework. Again, I'm hoping that you found it fairly easy. So use a chart below to answer the following questions. A homozygous short hair cat is crossed with a homozygous long hair cat. And we're going to have to look up here and see that short hair is capital H and long hair is lowercase h. So that means that short hair is dominant. So give the following, the short hair genotype. So it said homozygous, so we're going to have capital H, long hair genotype, lowercase h. Again, genotype tells us the actual letters. Phenotype is what we see. So the phenotype is short hair, the phenotype is long hair. The genotype is homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, and here it's capital H is another way of saying that. Lowercase h is another. Complete the Punnett squares for this cross. And you can complete it there, but I'm just going to use this. So we're going to cross homozygous dominant. Let's see here. I need to adjust the font size real quick, I believe. And probably all y'all are saying, it's over there, it's over there. That's where you see the font size. So anyways, so there, capital H crossed with lowercase h. Remember, we put one letter in each of these boxes. Up here represents the male. Males go on top, females go on the side. And so this sperm, capital H, combines with this egg. This sperm combines with this egg, sperm and egg, and sperm and egg. Now, it doesn't matter really whether it was the sperm or the egg that was dominant or recessive. I don't believe it even specified. But I always put the capital letter first so we think about what we're doing. Our results, 100% short hair. And remember the rules. You have to explain it to everyone like they don't know what they're talking about. So you have to tell me that it's 0% long hair. You don't want to lose points on something silly like that. Yes, I know that it is 0% long hair, but you can't assume that somebody who's grading the paper actually does. So if you were doing this like on a end of course exam or the ACT, tell them all the information. All right. And so that is a 4 to 0 ratio, or you could simplify it as 1 to 0, short to long hair. And again, specify everything out because you don't want them to assume, you don't want to put 0 to 4 and then the assumption is that short goes first because that's a dominant and then lose points that way. So show everything. Okay, so that's that problem. What are the genotypes for the offspring? We see from that Punnett square, capital H, lowercase h. What are the percentages? Again, I just covered that. All right, so tabby is dominant over stripeless in cats. A tabby male and a stripeless female have a litter of kittens with 50% being tabby and 50% being stripeless. What is the genotype of the mother? So this is a little bit more complex problem. You have to kind of think backwards here. And so what we want to do here is, it says that one parent is tabby and one is stripeless, and that tabby is dominant over stripeless. So we're going to say that one is a capital T and the other one's stripeless. So we know it's lowercase t for that one. So we don't know, what we don't know is this right here. What is the other trait of the father? So we know capital T, lowercase t is going to be here, capital T, lowercase t. And so I hope you understand what's going on here is that in this problem, it's saying that a tabby male, and tabby is dominant, And we don't know, is this male, it just tells us it's tabby. And there's two options for tabby. It could be this, or it could be this, capital T or lowercase t. So what is it going to be? Well, right now, both of these offspring, both of these probabilities here, remember the box represents a probability, both of them, I'm going to highlight it, those ones are going to be tabby. And we know that half of the offspring are stripeless. Well, what do we know about stripeless? Stripeless is recessive, so it's got to be two lowercase t's, right? So let's just say, where did this lowercase t come from? Well, it came from over here. So if this lowercase t came from over here, then where did this one come from? Well, it had to come from up here. And that tells us that the male had to be heterozygous. And so, that kind of makes sense then if we follow our color coding pattern here. Let's go with that. All right. And this would give us a result of that these two yellows would both be tabby, and these two right here would be both would be stripeless. And so this would give us our 50% and 50% ratio. Okay, a short hair male, WW, is crossed with a short hair female, capital W, lowercase w. What percentage of offspring will have short hair? And why did they switch to W? I mean, they should be using the H's that were up above. That doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, one reason I just kind of left that there is that to kind of emphasize the point, it doesn't matter really what letters you use. You can use any letters. So just avoid X's and Y's, because with the X's and Y's, it can get a little confusing with sex-linked traits, which we haven't got to. Y's actually are okay, but it's the X's you really want to avoid, okay? So anyways, back to the problem. It says we have short hair male that's homozygous dominant. So remember, males should go on top. It doesn't really matter. And then a short hair female, but she's heterozygous. Okay. And what percentage of the offspring will have short hair? So let's look here. Now, since they switched letters on me, I'm actually not remembering what was dominant. So I'm going to scroll up here. Short hair was dominant. So I look at the offspring. All right, capital, capital. That tells me it's a dominant trait. That's short hair. Capital, capital. That tells me it's short hair. Capital W, lowercase w. Now, I always put the capitals first, so that way I'm automatically thinking this is a dominant trait. All right, yeah, so that's short hair. That's also going to be the dominant trait, which is short hair. So basically, I end up with 100% short hair and 0% long hair, and that is a 4-to-0 short to long hair ratio. All right. Number 4, these are sex-linked traits. We have not studied these yet. That's why I wanted you to skip that. A normal, capital N, colored cat is crossed with a color point, lowercase n, in the F1 generation. So what is F1? It basically just means the children, all right? The grandchildren are called F2. It is Latin for filial 1. F2 stands for filial 2, and so that means the second generation of children or the first generation of children. And if you go back to the notes on Punnett, Mendel, go back to the notes on Mendel, and when we talked about monohybrid Punnett squares, I described what F1 and F2 stood for there, so you can review that. So in the F1 generation, what is the phenotype, what is it going to be for all the kittens? So, again, it very similar to this, except for we are going to go with N's, and mom was homozygous recessive and dad was homozygous dominant. And let's reread the question. That is a very important thing to do. Reread the question. All right. What is the phenotype going to be of all the kittens? So phenotype is what do we see, and our traits, capital N is normal, no color point, and lowercase n is color point. And so what we see here is that we have all of them no color point. So 100% no color point, and then 0% color point. And again, that's a 4-to-0 ratio. All right. Last question. A breeder of kittens has adopted a normal colored cat. He's not sure if the cat is homozygous or heterozygous for the normal trait. What genotype for color could the breeder cross the cat with to tell if he's adopted, the adopted cat is heterozygous or homozygous? And if you go back to the notes from last week, what we do is we basically cross it. Basically, you do this cross here. You cross it with a recessive, because what we don't know is this capital N or lowercase n? And so if it's capital N, we're going to end up with this, right? So let's just say this is what we're going to go with. All right, so then notice that, oh, I messed that up there. So if this is the case, then these first ends would be this gray one there, and that we would end up with 100% color point and no color point and 0% color point. So notice they're all normal is what we're going to call it maybe. Now, what if we go with this one instead? What if we have the lowercase n? All right. Well, now this is going to change our punnett, and how's it going to change it? Well, now we're going to end up with 50% normal or no color point and 50% color point. All right. And this is a 1-to-1 ratio. You might say, well, why isn't it 2-to-2? Well, that can be simplified. So this is a 1-to-1 ratio, no color point to color point. All right. So really the question is asking, what do we cross it with? Well, this right here. We're going to cross it with lowercase n, and that's called a test cross. And we did cover that in the last section of notes. I believe actually it was 2 sections ago. Right here, test crosses. So this is what it was talking about. So if you refer back to the notes 6-2, that shows you what a test cross is. Okay, so if you had any trouble there, just take a look at that. All right, so today we're going to talk about incomplete and codominant. So up to this point, I have been very, I've really wanted you to use the same letter. It doesn't really matter, but really you should use the same letter if you're using a monohybrid Mendelian genetics or complete dominance trait. And so Mendel really he got lucky. He was exceptionally lucky in what he did. If you think about it, like humans, do we have just 2 hair colors? No, there's more than just black hair and blonde hair. I mean, go to the hair color aisle in Walmart and just go with the natural colors, and there's probably 100 different hair colors to pick from. Eye color. Again, there's green eyes, there's blue eyes, there's brown eyes, there's hazel, and then actually there's all of these in between. I watched a episode one time of How It's Made, and they talked about how they made glass eyes, and they have 200 standard glass eyes for most eye companies that make these glass eyes for people. So there's 200 like common eye colors. So that's quite a large variety. If you think about skin color, there's way more than just 2 shades of skin color. All right, there's a whole bunch of them. So when you think of most traits, Mendel really doesn't explain what we see in human genetics. I mean, yeah, sure, a few things. Like, for example, widow's peak. Widow's peak's that little point on your hair. That's a complete dominant trait. Either you have it or you don't have it. It's either your hairline comes down to a point or it's more rounded. Kind of like Mendel right here does not have widow's peak, right? He actually has a receding hairline. All right, and then like attached earlobes versus unattached earlobes. Another one's mid-digit hair. Take a look at your index finger and look at the knuckles going from the end of your finger, go back, and you have your first knuckle, second knuckle, and then the third knuckle actually attaches your finger to your hand. And if you look between your first and second knuckle, do you have hair there? Some people do, some people don't. All right, take off your socks. Look at your big toe. That's called the hallux. It's either bigger than the rest of your toes or it's shorter. And again, that's a dominant versus recessive trait. So there are some that we see, but most traits are not that way. Mendel just happened to pick 6 that work that way. They weren't autosomes, meaning they weren't on sex chromosomes, and we'll get into what sex chromosomes do later, but they determine gender. Plants are all, well, not all, but most are hermaphrodites, so it really wouldn't have mattered much there anyways. But the other thing is they only had 2 alleles for each trait, and they were either dominant or recessive, which is really, really important. And remember the definition of an allele. A gene codes for a protein. An allele is a version of that protein. So it's a version of the trait. So for example, hair color is the gene, whereas the alleles are brown hair, blonde hair, sandy blonde hair, red hair, all the different hair colors. Now, so an autosomal, it's pertaining to a chromosome that's not a sex chromosome. And then we have incomplete dominance. So let's just think about how this works. If you have a canvas and we're going to paint it, when we talked about Mendelian genetics, either we put the paint on the canvas or we didn't. It's kind of like either you produce the protein or you don't produce the protein. So let's just say the paint represents the protein, right? We have a blank canvas. What color is a blank canvas? White-ish. I know some of you are going to say cream or something like that, but let's just say it's white, okay? So if you take a red paintbrush, and since we have 2 alleles for every gene, take a red paintbrush and paint the canvas. Take another red paintbrush, paint the canvas. That's like homozygous dominant. You have 2 of them coding for that particular protein, and it's producing the red protein, and we end up with red for the color of the canvas. Okay? Now, what about heterozygous? Well, heterozygous is either you produce it or you don't. So, again, take your blank canvas. It's white. We're going to dip one paintbrush in red. We're going to paint the canvas. Now, we're going to dip another paintbrush in water. Water has no pigment. In other words, it represents not having the protein. Now, it doesn't matter if you smear water over it. I mean, yeah, it might make the paint a little watery, but it doesn't matter. The paint is still there. It's still going to make the canvas red. You have a red canvas. All right. Now, what about homozygous recessive? That means 2 copies of the gene don't produce the protein. So we're going to take our white canvas to begin with, paint it with water. Nothing happens. Paint it again with water. Again, nothing happens. You end up with a white canvas. And so this is a good example of how we see traits working in Mendelian genetics. It's either red or white. There's no in between. It's one or the other. And so like in roses, it is the one worksheet I frequently give. It talks about red's dominant over white. Now, in snapdragons, if we cross red and white, we end up with pink as the in-between. So how does this work? Well, what happens is you can actually produce a white pigment. So let's take a red paintbrush and a red paintbrush and we paint the canvas. We end up with a red canvas. Now, instead of using water though, what we're going to do is we're going to use white paint. If we take a white paintbrush and a white paintbrush and we paint that canvas, we end up with a white flower. Well, what's the difference? I mean, really, is anything different so far? No. But if we take that red paint and that white paint and we mix them together and we paint the canvas, we now end up with pink in between because we both have a red pigment and a white pigment. It's red and white paint mixed together. And that's how we end up with this pink color. So these flowers, this one is red, has two alleles, both of them producing a protein that makes it red in color and your eyes see red. And this flower produces a white protein. It's a protein, it's the same protein, but it's been modified so that it basically shows up as white. Whereas these pink ones down here, they produce one of each. And these are the F1s. When we cross a pure breeding red with a pure breeding white, we end up with pink. And then if we cross red with white, again, we end up with the pink as the in-between color. All right. So let's go ahead and let's go back, and we're going to end the show here. And so we're going to cross, I'm going to do this on this Word document that I had. All right. And so what we're going to do, probably would have been quicker just to recreate it. So we're going to cross a red with a white for the flowers here. So we're going to cross red, pure breeding red, with a pure breeding white flower. And then the F1, now it doesn't matter if I write RW or WR, not at all. Just be consistent. So if you use RW every time. So what is my ratio here? So, or not ratio, percentage. I have 100%. What do I have 100% of? I have 100% pink, right? Now, there's a problem here. If that's how you were going to leave your answer, you are wrong. How many different colors are there? There are 3 options, and I need to, oh, there we go. So 0% red and 0% white. There are now 3 options, so you got to have all 3 there. Really, technically, you should be putting the red first, then the pink, and then the white. So in the ratio, it should say 0 to 1 to 0, red to white to, red to pink. And this is why you write out the ratio, because I almost made a mistake there, to white. And you say, well, Mr. Clutter, what if I said 1 to 0 to 0? That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Just you got to tell me then that it's pink to red to white. Because if you put 1 to 0 to 0 and you just leave it, a test evaluator at the state is going to look at his answer key and it's going to say 0, 1, 0, and he's going to mark you wrong, even though you knew the right answer. And that's just silly. Don't do that. Okay? So write out what you actually know. Show people what you know. All right. Now, what if we did this with the F2 now? What if we cross the F2? All right. So now what I want to do is I want to cross RW with RW. I'm going to take 2 of the children. These are the F1s. They're plants. They can inbreed. They don't care. We're going to cross 2 pinks with 2 pinks. All right, so what color is this one right here? Red, right? So what's my percentage of red? I only have, of these 4 boxes, only one of them has RR. So that's going to be 25% red. This one here and here are both pink, right? That's 2 out of the 4 boxes, so that's 50% pink. Down here we have WW. That is 25% white. So now what's my ratio? 1 to 2 to 1, and my phenotype ratio is now 1 to 2 to 1. Notice my genotype ratio, which we didn't do too much with this before, but this genotype ratio has always existed. The genotype ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. 1 to 2 to 1. Notice the genotype and the phenotype ratios are the same. Okay, so if I take a red cow, and I scoured the internet for a red cow because I was not going to have product placement by saying red bull, and I'm going to cross it with a white bull. Do I end up with a pink cow? That's not where strawberry milk comes from. Here we go. So there you have a spotted cow. That's known as roan. R-O-A-N. So you end up with a roan cow. And so really, what does the Punnett square look like? Well, it's actually exactly the same, which is why we're covering this at the same time. So what the heck is the difference between complete dominance and codominance and incomplete dominance? So in incomplete dominance, red and white makes pink. Here we have red and white, and we end up with something that's red with white spots. All right, so just you answer this question to yourself. If I have a red fruiting tree and a yellow fruiting tree, and we cross them, and we end up with all orange fruits, is that incomplete or codominance? The answer is that would be incomplete dominance, because red and yellow, neither of them dominate, and so they end up with the in-between color of orange. Now, what would a codominant tree look like? If we had a red fruiting and a yellow fruiting tree, we might end up with a yellow fruit with red spots. Or maybe it's something really weird, like a yellow fruit with red stripes. It can be stripes too. I've seen a question where it was grasshoppers, and it had some had red stripes, some had yellow stripes, and if they bred, then you had red and yellow stripes on the sides of the grasshoppers. And yes, there are grasshoppers that have stripes on them. Okay. So these Punnett squares look exactly the same. The only difference is in our results. Basically, instead of pink, we would have roan, also known as spotted. But everything else is exactly the same if we cross a spotted cow with a spotted cow. If it's a red cow with a white bull, then we'd end up with all 100% spotted. Nope. So I'm not going to go over all the results there, but there you go. All right, and then the rest of this slideshow is something that we did cover in class previously, so I'm not going to bother going over that. But just remember these lethal allele traits, where a double dose gives you, basically it's lethal, it's dead, so you can't have a double recessive trait. I'm sorry, double dominant trait. You can't have a double dominant. Double recessive is fine, that's a hairy dog. One recessive or one dominant trait, which is hairless, gives you a hairless dog, but two hairless genes actually kills the offspring. And we saw the same thing with the yellow mice. And there's a couple of different traits with these lethal alleles. It's another example of Mendel not getting it quite right, because he always came out with a 3-to-1 ratio. These actually come out to a 2-to-1 ratio, because 1/4 of the offspring are dead, and we don't count those, so that leaves you with 2/3 of the offspring, and it's a 1-to-2 ratio. All right. Again, that's just review of something we talked about previously. I'm not worried about spending a lot of time on that. So, anyways, that is incomplete and codominance. And go ahead and post any questions that you have, and I hope all is well. Have a great day.